So yeah, thank you all for joining us. I am really excited to be talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. This is an ongoing and evolving policy legislation that is going to be having different impacts depending on the city and the municipality that folks are in. So we're here today mostly to talk about the tax incentives, some of the grants that are available, some of the opportunities, and also some of the potential pitfalls around some of the money that's going to be coming down through the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're really excited. I'm going to introduce Elizabeth here in a second, but before I do, I wanted to just do a couple quick housekeeping things and let you all know about a few things that are coming down the pipeline for us at the Seattle 2030 District. We've got our February Education Forum, which is going to be focused on CPACER and energy efficiency financing. That is going to be held live and in person at Seattle College's Georgetown campus. They are generously hosting us. That'll be on February 8th at 5:30. Registration is going to be opening for that in the next couple days here. We're going to be joined by Kitsap Bank and Pace, I think it's Pace Loan Group. But Rachel Braunbaugh, formerly of King County, will be joining us to talk a little bit about King County's program and how property owners and property managers can take advantage of CPACER financing. So I hope to see a lot of you there. I also wanted to let you know about the 2023 Vision Awards. I hope you all got our save the date. That is coming up on April 19th at the brand new Seattle Convention Center. We are very excited to be doing this again live and in person. Nominations are currently open for the Vision Awards. So if you have any fantastic buildings or projects that you'd like to put forward for any of our awards across energy, water, transportation, or leadership, please let us know. We're very excited to be doing this all together again. Last year was fantastic, and we're so excited to be doing it in last year's winner for water, the Seattle Convention Center. So really excited about that. And for those property owners and property managers among you, please make sure that you are finalizing your 2022 numbers in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, making sure you have all that in there. That way we can turn around and give you the best possible building performance reports and make sure that your properties are having the best view of how they're doing. So that's our housekeeping for today. What we're going to be doing is just kind of going over the overview of the IRA, the tax credits, incentives, rebates that are available, some grants and loans that are possible, and then we're going to try and leave a lot of time for Q&A. And I'm so pleased to welcome Elizabeth Nelson. She's a partner with Nelson CPA PLLC, and she has been very carefully tracking the IRA and has been one of the really strong voices that we've been going to for expert advice on how these tax incentives and the structure of this legislation is going to impact property owners and property managers. I will also say that Elizabeth has been monitoring some of our local and statewide legislation pretty closely as well. So if you do have any questions about what's going on at the state and local level, at least according to, in terms of the building performance standards and things like that, she can probably speak to that. And I'm happy to throw her under the bus to answer any questions regarding that ongoing legislation. Now, the legislative session is in session, so don't hold her to how the outcome might turn out, but at least for now, she's got a pretty strong bead on what's happening at the state and at the city. So with that, I think, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a second. Elizabeth, one last thing I just wanted to mention as we kind of kick off here is that as we're talking about this piece sort of falls outside of the Inflation Reduction Act, but I just wanted everyone to kind of be aware. Back December 7th, President Biden signed Executive Order 14057, which is the Federal Sustainability Plan. And what this does is it directs agencies to cut energy use and electrify their equipment. Basically, they have to get 30% of their buildings by square footage to be zero direct greenhouse gases by the year 2030. And the reason that we mention this, the reason we bring this up, even though it's not necessarily exactly related to the Inflation Reduction Act, is that this is meant to sort of be a market driver that will make other property developers and other folks who are considering building upgrades consider that if they want to have a federal agency housed in any of their properties in the future, this is something that they need to be thinking about. So this is just another perspective on maybe one of the things that is driving the sea change that we're seeing around building efficiency. And with that, Elizabeth, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. All right. We'll move this slide over. So the Inflation Reduction Act authorizes $370 billion in federal funding to invest in domestic energy production, energy efficiency upgrades, clean transportation, climate-ready agriculture and resilience, and clean manufacturing. If fully implemented, it's estimated that the IRA will reduce U.S. carbon emissions by about 40% by 2030. Most programs, it looks like, are going to run through EPA and the Department of Energy. Also, if you count a tax credit as a program, a lot of stuff, the Treasury Department's working really hard too. And there are some that are going through USDA, HUD, DOI, DOT, Commerce. I should mention that my expertise is going to be on the tax stuff. So if we get a grant question, I'm going to throw it to Daniel. All right. Sorry, let me get this up here. My notes up. Oh, I see a note here. Sorry. Availability of the funds is sometimes conditioned on the beneficiary ensuring that laborers are going to be paid prevailing wages. Yeah, you'll hear these often in the tax credits and in the deduction as the quote wage and apprenticeship rules. They're pretty copy paste for a lot of these tax incentives, but that's something to be aware of. So the IRA sets out to achieve two goals: cleaner, cheaper, and more secure energy grids, and built environments ready to take full advantage. Okay. All right, so now we get to the good stuff. The IRA contains a lot of funding opportunities, can be broken into two buckets: guaranteed incentives and competitive funding. And so I don't know when you want me to throw it back to you, but I will talk about the tax credits for a little bit. For a building owner, and more specifically a landlord or a business that owns a building, I think the main credits to watch are the investment tax credit in that first bullet point, the refueling infrastructure tax credit, because that's what you'd claim if you installed EV chargers, for example, in the parking garage or the parking lot, and then that commercial buildings energy efficiency tax deduction, the 179 capital D deduction for short. A lot of folks have probably heard in the news about something called the 25 capital C credit. And the one comment I would put out there is that credit is only available for dwelling units that are used as a residence by the taxpayer. So you can use it for your personal home. You could use it for a vacation home that you sometimes rent and sometimes use yourself. But for a typical landlord, 25C is not your credit. Your incentive for energy efficiency is the 179D deduction. And should I throw it to you, Daniel, to talk about some of the other stuff?
Yeah, and we'll just say that, there are some things in here that seem to be more targeted at single family homes, but for anything that is also, we tried to include anything that would touch on multifamily or apartment buildings or condos or anything that we thought might be of interest to the 2030 district membership. We'll also be talking a little bit about the nonprofits and everything. So, looking at some of these competitive funding opportunities, a lot of them are really geared towards, environmental justice or, even affordable housing, climate pollution reduction. There are some funding opportunities that are available for tax exempt organizations, and we'll talk a little bit about more about that. I'll also just say that some of this funding and grant money is probably going to evolve once it hits the state and city level. So we have a pretty good beat on where we think that money is going to be going. But the big ones for our property owners are that commercial building energy efficiency tax deduction, that 179D. So we'll be spending a bunch of time talking about that, but some of these other opportunities are really great opportunities for everyone to make some serious building improvements.
Oop. Accidentally double clicked. My organization tax exempt, can we benefit from tax incentive programs? Yes. So for the tax credits, the new rule is that it's a refundable credit if you are a nonprofit. So if you want to put rooftop solar panels on a building, if you want to put EV chargers in a building and the EV charger is located in a census tract that is a rural or low income census tract, those credits are now refundable if you're a nonprofit. For the commercial buildings deduction, the way it works is it's kind of odd, it's kind of quirky, but you can transfer the deduction to the designer. So what that will then do is it will shelter some of the designer's income from taxes, however much of a deduction you transfer to them. And so the idea, hopefully, from your perspective, is you could use that knowledge when figuring out what price you're going to pay the designer to design the building. And that's how you would get value out of that. What types of tax incentive programs are available? So the investment tax credit is usually thought of in green energy circles as the solar panel credit. You can also get storage. It's up to 50% and it's 30%. And so because it's a refundable credit now for nonprofits, and because if you get the full 30% credit, the IRS is paying 30% of the cost of the panels. That's the core concept. You got to wait a little bit for the money, but a 30% credit means they're paying 30% of the cost of the panels. And the way you get that money is they're reducing your tax bill. Production tax credit is not really my area. I believe that's usually used for wind energy. And so I'm more of a buildings person. Maybe if someone out there is going to put a wind turbine on their roof, that's relevant. But so that's that one. Okay, and we'll move on. EV tax incentives. There's a commercial electric vehicle tax credit. I don't know how relevant that's going to be to building owners, but it's good to know it's there. The big things to know about that commercial vehicle tax credit is it needs to be, you need to use it or lease it. It can't be inventory. So like a car dealership can't buy a bunch of vehicles and then sell them later as inventory and claim the credit. That doesn't work. You got to lease it or use it yourself. And it's got to be depreciable property. So I'm going to guess a lot of folks in the audience are familiar that, generally speaking, you need to own stuff to be able to depreciate it. Sometimes tenants depreciate unreimbursed improvements. One of the rules is it's got to be depreciable property. And then refueling infrastructure tax credit. Think of that. I would suggest thinking of that as an EV charger credit. There's other alternative energy forms too, but it's meant to be an EV charger credit. And the big thing to know about that is one of the last minute changes that came from this deal between Senator Manchin and Senator Schumer is that credit is now only available for census tracts that are either rural or low income. So not necessarily going to be something that works in many neighborhoods in the Puget Sound area, but that's something to be aware of. That was not in the Senate Finance Committee version. That was a pure, this is what Senator Manchin wants, so this is what the law is going to be sort of restriction. Anything else? Any comments to make about these tax credits, Daniel?
There is some refueling infrastructure tax credit funding available also for like EV bikes and that kind of thing. So if you want to have electric bike charging, that is something that is also in there and is a potential especially as we're all kind of looking at our existing transportation management plans for our buildings and thinking about, what are some of the ways to hit some of these targets. This could be a good way to sort of offset the cost of some of the any kind of parking improvements you want to do around basically what they call like two-wheel electric vehicles.
Yeah.
I think leaves a lot of room for interpretation.
Oh, one other thing. I should have thought to mention this. The EV charger credit, it's 30% of the cost of the charger up to $100,000 per, I believe the language in the statute is per item of property. How is item of property defined? We don't know yet. That's something we're waiting on Treasury regulations for, but it's a very big upper limit. We can move on.
And we
Okay.
apologize for the volume of text on this slide. This goes wildly against PowerPoint best practices, but there's a lot in the in this particular piece.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you are a landlord who doesn't use the dwelling unit you're renting as a residence ever, which I think is most landlords, or if you are a business that owns property, or if you are a nonprofit that owns property, this is it basically. This is your deduction. This is your tax incentive. There are grant programs too, but in the tax world, this is your thing. And so it's good to spend probably the most amount of time on it. So this, unlike a lot of stuff in the Inflation Reduction Act, this deduction is permanent. That wasn't actually an Inflation Reduction Act change. That was part of a consolidated appropriations bill passed in late 2020. There was like a big COVID relief bill. One of the little goodies that got snuck in there was 17090 was permanent. What the Inflation Reduction Act changed is it made the deduction more generous. It made the deduction contingent on meeting wage and apprenticeship rules. And it used to be that federal, state, and local governments could transfer the deduction, which is something we touched on earlier. Now, any nonprofit can transfer that deduction. In fact, I think it's any organization exempt from income tax under Chapter 1. So the definition of nonprofit that can now transfer that deduction is broad. And the core concept that the nature of the incentive is very different depending on whether you are a landlord or a business that's operating for profit, or if you are a nonprofit entity that's going to try to transfer that deduction. For a typical for-profit landlord, what this is that this is an option to deduct the cost of a deep energy retrofit all in the first year, as opposed to having to capitalize and depreciate it over several years. So if anyone out there is familiar with the Section 179 deduction, it's not a coincidence that this code section is called Section 179 capital D. Conceptually, very, very similar. Also, if anyone out there is familiar with the idea of bonus depreciation, where you buy a big expensive capital asset and you deduct it all in the first year instead of having to capitalize and depreciate it over several years, very same concept. The whole point is it's a time value of money benefit. By deducting now and recognizing more taxable income later and less taxable income this year, you're kicking the can down the road on when you pay your tax bill. And in the time between then and now that you've delayed paying that tax, you get a time value of money benefit. You can use that money in some other investment. So what's the value of this deduction? Well, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on how many years, maybe decades, would you've had to capitalize, would you've had to depreciate that investment had this incentive not existed? What's the discount rate you can use for an investment? If your best investment option only earns you like a 3% compound return, maybe this isn't that exciting. But if your best investment option earns you a 5 or a 6% compound return, and it's several decades that you've delayed paying that tax bill, okay, that's more interesting. So that's the concept. For a nonprofit, The incentive, the nature of the incentive, totally different, totally different. Instead, the way it works for nonprofits, because there's no income tax to delay, is the nonprofit can transfer the deduction to the designer. So the engineer, the architecture firm, whoever it is that's designing this retrofit for you, you will transfer it to them. And then whatever size deduction you transfer to the designer gets to shelter that much income of theirs from income tax. And that's the incentive. So a couple of things to keep in mind if you're a nonprofit, the design firms that specialize in 179D, they're going to love talking to you. They're going to love trying to come up with a really big, expensive retrofit that saves a lot of energy for your building, because that's their incentive. Their incentive is they don't have to pay income tax on any deduction they get you. So as you are working with designers, negotiating with them, and thinking about the work they do for you, keep in mind that that is their incentive. I don't want to talk on and on too much. Daniel, do you have anything to add before we get to kind of the more specifics of this?
No, other than just to say that, this is a pretty big jump up from what had previously been what previously had existed. So previously it was only up to $2.50 per square foot. So this more than doubles the maximum incentive that you can get, the maximum deduction that you can get for any energy efficiency upgrades. Elizabeth might talk more about this, but one of the things that we are looking at is this is something that as we look at our city building performance standard that's coming down the pipeline, which is going to require a lot of electrification, and as we're looking at the statewide building performance standard, which we can talk a little bit more about at the end if folks have questions about that, that's requiring energy efficiency improvements. This is something that a lot of folks are going to have to be doing anyway to be in compliance with those building performance standards. So not taking advantage of this money is a really important opportunity, and I hope that folks are really tracking this pretty closely.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So maybe as a kind of final comment, the way the workflow on this deduction works is you want to decide before you'd make the investment if you're going to try and claim it, because if you want to take advantage of this, you'll need to find an engineering firm or an architecture firm, whoever the design firm is. You want to make sure they really know 179D, and you want to tell them before they start drawing some plans that, hey, I want you to be thinking about 179D when you design this. This is not something to, when it's time to do your tax return several months later, ask your tax accountant, hey, can we make this work? Because if that's when you start thinking about it, it's too late. And then the way this works is you will go to the designer. They will design it in a way that means you can get this upfront deduction as opposed to having to capitalize and depreciate it. And then they will have like a report, a bunch of forms, and they will give them to you, and they will say, hand this to your regular tax professional, whoever does your tax return every year. And you will give that to your tax professional. And then hopefully your tax professional will know how to enter that information when they do your tax return. So if anyone in the audience has ever done a cost segregation study, it's very, very similar to that in terms of how the workflow works. In fact, a design firm that really knows what they're doing might do a cost segregation study at the same time. That would be very predictable. And then I guess the final comment I'd make, just so people have a sense for the scale of how much you might be able to deduct in the first year, so the amount of the deduction depends on two things. It depends on how much you've reduced your energy use intensity by, so that's one term of art. And then it also depends on the square footage, any of the place you're renovating. And you need to reduce energy use intensity by at least 25%. And then the deduction is per square foot based on that reduction. So if you reduce your energy use intensity by 25%, that's a $2.50 per square foot deduction. If you use by 26%, the deduction is $2.60, and so on and so on, up to if you've reduced it by 50%, which would be amazing, it's like a $5 deduction per square foot. So just to illustrate, let's say you spend $120,000 to retrofit a $50,000 square foot building, and that retrofit leads to a 30% reduction in your energy use intensity, and you met those prevailing wage apprenticeship rules. That's important. So pick a contractor that knows the rules and who you can count on to pay prevailing wages and meet the apprenticeship targets. In that situation, your upfront deduction would be $120,000. And the reason is because you got 50,000 square feet with 30% energy use intensity reduction. That means your deduction is $3 per square foot. 50,000 times $3 is $150,000. So you have not reached the upper limit of how much you can deduct up front. Okay, another example, let's say that instead of spending 120,000, that retrofit cost 160,000. Well, in that situation, you would deduct 150,000 upfront because 150 is your upper limit. And then the remaining $10,000 that you spent on that retrofit, that you'd have to capitalize and depreciate over either 27.5 or 39 years, depending on how the IRS depreciation rules classify that property. Does that make sense? So that's the scale of what you can deduct up front.
And I'll just add that, when we're looking at the Washington State Building Performance Standard, there is still the early adopter incentive program. So if you're making these changes in a timely manner, you can take advantage of that 85 cents a square per square foot incentive available through the state. So now you're at $5.85. These things can kind of layer onto each other. So this is a really, really good opportunity. And there was a question about, is the 50% reduction in annual energy savings? It's an EUI target. We believe it's based on the pre-improvement building performance. I don't think it's based on a baseline, although there is some language in the bill about compared to a comparable building or something like that is a little confusing, but we know it's an EUI target, and hopefully maybe there will be more clarity about that as people begin to adopt this a little bit more.
Yeah, we're waiting on Treasury regulations on that for sure. So maybe it is time. Oh, I keep remembering things that I should mention about it. The type of property that you would claim this upfront deduction for is stuff like interior lighting systems, the HVAC system, hot water system, the building envelope, everything you'd expect to be getting at in a deep energy retrofit. I think that's the last comment. Oh, and the retrofitted building needs to be at least 5 years old for the version of the 179D deduction that we've been talking about. They call it an alternative deduction in section 179D paragraph F. Okay, I think that's the tax stuff done. So I'm going to throw it back to Daniel to chat about a little bit.
Yeah, I just will kind of briefly touch on some of this. There are some energy efficiency incentives and rebates, mainly, for single family homeowners, but also for homeowners of multifamily housing. There are a bunch of direct rebates for whole home energy efficiency upgrades. And when they say whole home energy, I think they are also referring to the apartments or units within multifamily housing. So, there are energy savings of, at least if you can demonstrate energy savings of 35%, you can receive up to $400,000 or 50% of the project costs for a multifamily project. You can get up to $200,000 if you're demonstrating 20% energy savings. And then there's a bunch for low and middle income housing. So rebates are a little higher, and the savings threshold minimum is lower, so that people can take advantage of that. 179D is the real big tax piece, but there are some incentives built into the IRA. Now, these are probably not going to be immediately accessible, as Treasury works on actually applying this, and then figuring out who's going to be implementing some of these is going to be a little tricky as it goes to states' Department of Commerce and the various other state agencies who will ultimately be administering some of these programs. So a big one that I wanted to mention, just because we have a lot of affordable housing providers in the 2030 district, there are some really great grants and loans for energy efficiency, water efficiency, clean energy improvements. And these ones are on a little shorter time frame. So we want to make sure people are aware of them now. That money's going to fly away. But yeah, the grants and loans are going to be available for upgrades, just building sustainability upgrades. There's $1 billion available in direct grants and $4 billion available in loans. That's kind of a drop in the bucket. So if you're interested in getting after these, you're going to want to go sooner rather than later, so that you can, before all that money does run out. And this is really designed for nonprofits and owners of qualified affordable housing and multifamily projects. So we also just wanted to kind of briefly share some of the selected grant appropriations. So this is where the money has been allocated, and you'll see that $3 billion is going for environmental and climate justice block grants. So those will be distributed down to cities and municipalities. Neighborhood access and equity grants are receiving $3 billion. Climate pollution reduction, $250 million for planning, $4.75 billion for plan implementation. So that's an exciting opportunity for for cities and municipalities to really try and reduce their greenhouse gas pollution. Building codes, there's $1 billion in there. I'm not sure if anybody from City of Seattle is with us today, but there's $1 billion to support jurisdictions as they adopt and update their building codes. There's some stuff for forestry. We'll just skip right over that. And then there's this green bank program. There's $27 billion in this for that, which supports competitive grants to national and local green banks, which will use the money to invest in projects and innovations intended to reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions and other forms of air pollution. So that's something we don't currently have out here. Our friends in New York, the 2030 districts out there, work pretty closely with the Green Bank in New York. This is something that people have been talking about for a while, and it'll be interesting to see if this begins to materialize out here. So I think we've really covered a lot, but the sort of next steps for folks is to really make sure that you are thinking about these guaranteed incentives and begin to think about how you can link these incentives to your organization's upcoming retrofit plans, construction plans. Are there other opportunities that maybe you have not been considering that could push you over the qualification threshold? Like if you do this other upgrade, or you do a energy efficiency HVAC improvement, or building controls, will that put you over the threshold that will get you to be able to take advantage of some of these targets? Involve your finance folks, your operations folks, your attorneys early and often in the process, and make sure everyone is aware, especially of 179D. That's the big one. Like Elizabeth said, if you can make sure that your contractor is aware and has the tax appetite to take on your deduction, that's really great if you're a nonprofit. And then, pay attention to Treasury regulations and IRS guidance as they come. We will continue to work with Elizabeth and the other 2030 districts across the network to make sure that we are communicating anything we learn about changes in the regulations. And so, please stay tuned to the Seattle 2030 District newsletter and join us for more of these education sessions so that we can communicate all that to you all. And then, make sure when you're talking to your contractor that they can actually deliver on both the performance upgrades, but also on, working with you on the making sure you can take advantage of that tax incentive. Because if not, then you might want to be shopping for another potential contractor. We've got some great ones, I think, on the horn today who are more than happy to jump in and take advantage of these tax incentive programs. So that's really the big things to be thinking about as we move forward. But now, we've got a lot of time and we wanted to open it up for Q&A. If folks have any questions, feel free to either throw them in the chat or raise a hand or just jump in, whatever you feel comfortable with. We're here to answer any questions about the tax structure or about if you have any questions about the legislation at the state level that's ongoing, we can provide some updates on that too if folks are curious. Yeah, we want to open the floor for any questions. Okay, we have a question in the chat. A little confused on the tax-exempt designer credit. Can you give an example? So is the question about a tax-exempt entity being able to transfer the tax credit to the designer? Is that the question? Is that what you'd like an example of, Jenny?
Yeah,
Okay.
That's my question.
All right. Elizabeth, do you want to take this one or?
Yeah, sure. So when I talked about the 179D deduction, I gave an example of a taxpayer spends $120,000 to retrofit a $50,000 square foot building. Their upfront deduction, 179D deduction, is $120,000. Let's say that building owner who spends that money is a nonprofit. Well, in that case, what the nonprofit can do is they can transfer that $120,000 deduction to the designer. And then the last $120,000 of the designer's income, they don't have to pay income tax on it. So that's the concept. So how would you as a nonprofit get value out of that? Well, I want to be careful about, there's a fine line between tax advice and other financial advice, but hopefully when you are negotiating with that designer and you're thinking, gosh, it's going to be pretty valuable that there's $120,000 of income that they just don't need to pay income tax on, you could get yourself a pretty good price on that retrofit by doing it that way. In fact, they might, how much would they even want to charge you at all for that work if you think about it?
Okay, so that was my question, is how is the building owner getting any advantage? And obviously that's going to come through whatever deal you've worked with the designer then. Do I have that right?
Exactly.
I got it. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question.
And that's also why we encourage getting straight with your contractor early in the process, is just to make sure that those agreements are hammered out. I'm going to answer a quick one from John. Is the threshold for the full value of 179D $5 a square foot? Is that a 50% reduction or a 25% energy reduction? To get to $5 a square foot, you have to hit the 50% reduction target. The 25% is the minimum. So if you're doing anything less than a 25% energy efficiency reduction or energy reduction in your building, then you're not going to be eligible for 179D. So that's a really good question, but it's something to just kind of reinforce that you have to make a pretty significant building improvement to get to that $5 a square foot. We've got another question from Cam Walker in the chat. Is there a timeline for when funding will be available, in particular for 179D commercial energy efficiency? It seems like details are still being worked out. Details definitely are being worked out, but Elizabeth, my understanding is that could you apply for 179D on your taxes this coming year?
Yeah, so the changes are effective as of January 1st, 2023. So 179 has always existed, but it had gotten a little bit stale. The formulas hadn't really kept up with the technology or what investors were interested in doing. So these new rules that we're talking about are effective for projects 20 that you do 2023 or later. And there is no expiration date. As under current law, I mean, Congress can always change tax laws. Goodness, we all know that. But under current law, it's available forever. So that's when it's effective. Now the ultimate question is, when do we actually have clear guidance on what it's going to take to qualify? And the answer on that is, I don't know. I wish I knew. We've gotten a little bit of guidance coming out here and there. The Treasury, the IRS have mentioned that they're working on a new form for how to claim it, Form 7205. That form has not been published yet. They're still working on it. They're working very hard, I think, in the back rooms, in the bureaucracy, but we don't have that much public info on it yet.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And I'll just answer another quick one from Angie, who asked, are there any good resources summarizing the benefits of processes for utilizing these incentives? Those, I would say, are, and Elizabeth, if you have another thought on this, feel free to jump in, but I think it's still very much evolving. I would point you to two really good resources. One is the Green Building Initiative based out of DC. They're a really good resource. I would also point you to, actually, NIA has a really good building sort of financing tool that might be helpful. And might talk a little bit about some of the tax incentives that are available. And I would also point you to Rewiring America, which is they've been talking to a lot of people, including us, about the IRA, and they may have some really good resources in that. And of course, any resources that we get at the Seattle 2030 District, we will be sharing with our members to make sure that folks can take full advantage of these incentives and processes. Oh, here's one that I actually don't know the answer to. Elizabeth, maybe you can jump in for this. It's for affordable housing. How would this act treat multifamily buildings that are 30% affordable and 70% market rate?
So my expertise is the tax stuff, and the 179D deduction, I don't believe it had any special provision for buildings that have a certain percentage of affordable housing. I saw affordable housing related stuff in some of the grant programs, but as far as the affordable housing for 179D, I don't know. There's also extra investment tax credit that you can get if you put solar panels on buildings that are in low-income communities or on affordable housing. I have to confess, I have not dug into the details of that particular situation where you're claiming the solar panel tax credit. And one comment about, well, actually, that's not going to be, must be for a nonprofit, so that won't be terribly relevant for that. So I will just leave it there. Okay. How do you prove the efficiency, and what is the timeline before you can get any benefit? That is one of the things they are working on regulations for. There's a certification process. I have seen bits and pieces come out where the IRS and the Treasury are requesting comment on what that system should be, because they changed the rules a little bit. It used to be, it had to be an engineering firm. Now, in some cases, it can be an architecture firm. An independent firm will need to certify it. And so that certification is going to be in the stack of documents that you get from the designer. If they're doing it right and they dotted their I's and crossed their T's. Are there incentives for new commercial buildings as well, or is this just retrofits? Oh, that's a really good question. So the original version of 179D was mostly written, I think, with new energy efficient buildings in mind. And that's what might now be called the standard 179D deduction, the one that's described in 179D paragraph A. And it works very similarly as the formula that caps the deduction amount works very similarly in that situation compared to this new, what we're calling the alternative deduction. And the alternative deduction has expanded 179D to work a little bit better for retrofits. And let me see if I can get the correct statutory language here. Because I don't want to put out poor information.
Well, Elizabeth, while you're looking for that, the
Yeah.
other thing I would just mention too is for new construction, the CPAs for financing is actually a really good model for that. And I'd also point you to Seattle City Lights Living Building Challenge and the 2030 Challenge, which get you additional floor area ratio and building height in the process of new construction in Seattle. So those are some other ways to kind of just take advantage of some programs that are available for new construction early in the process. And as interest rates maybe continue to rise, that CPAs for financing is probably going to become a more appealing option. And it might encourage you to make energy efficiency or building sustainability upgrades that you might not otherwise choose to make for new construction. And to learn more about that, join us on February 8th for our CPACER education forum that we're going to be doing at Seattle colleges. About 45L for new multifamily development.
That is an excellent question. So we didn't talk about 45L, and the thing that I would say is the differentiator is for new buildings to claim 179D, the building needs to be within the scope of ASHRAE standard 90.1. And so that's only really going to work for commercial buildings and large multifamily buildings. That rule that it needs to be within the scope of ASHRAE standard 90.1 isn't the case for the alternative deduction. So what 45L is for, and I've written about this a little bit on our blog, but I haven't dug too deep into it. That's intended for the smaller new builds, new residential builds that are not going to get to use the 179D classic, maybe we can call it, that only applies to new construction. So the rule is the old version of the credit, 45L credit, provided $2,000 to eligible contractors for each newly constructed or, quote, substantially reconstructed home if the home consumed 50% less energy than a comparable dwelling unit and had a building envelope that accounted for at least 1/5 of the energy cost reductions. What the Inflation Reduction Act changed is it increased that credit amount to $2,500 if the home met Energy Star requirements. And the credit is $5,000 for zero energy ready homes. So bigger credit and slightly more elegant and easy to meet and understand eligibility criteria. So, and that new credit applies to dwelling units acquired after December 31st, 2022. So it's available, it's there. That's not my practice area, so that's about as much as I know about it.
Well, I think we've answered all the questions in the chat. If anyone else has any others, please feel free to jump in. We are, like I said, we're going to be sharing new information about the IRA implementation as those programs start to get developed. I can share this slide deck with everyone. Oh, I really want to thank the Cleveland 2030 district and the Greater Cleveland Partnership for providing the background that made this this slide deck possible. And also, I really want to thank Elizabeth for taking the time to talk to us and for pitch hitting here for Jenna. If you would like to learn more about this from the Green Building Initiative, Jenna Hamilton's going to be presenting to the whole 2030 district network on March 8th. So please feel free to come then. I think there will be a little less of a deep dive on the tax side, but it could be a valuable second perspective to get. So yeah, so we'll be providing this and the video recording after the presentation. And yeah, any final questions? All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and please join me in thanking Elizabeth for her time and for talking us through this. She's a fantastic resource, and we look forward to continuing to work with her and all of you as we figure out more about these opportunities.
Thank you for inviting me, Daniel. This was really fun.